Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Hellblazer number 9. And just a little catch up on what was going on in the last issue. John was injured after jumping out of a train because there are ghosts that were haunting him of all his past friends who had died while trying to help John out. So he was feeling pretty bad, actually, because Richie, his last alive friend out of all these guys, just died. And so he was being haunted by all of them at once on this train. So while it's going 60 miles an hour, John freaks out and he jumps out of a door off the train. And the next thing he knows, he wakes up in a hospital where he finds out that most of his limbs have been broken and there's lots of parts of him that are just completely injured. So he's going to be in the hospital for a while. So as John is realizing this, all of a sudden someone comes to visit. John pretends to be asleep, and it turns out it's the demon Nergal that is giving him an ultimatum. John needs to join Nergal and the Damnation Army side of this battle that's been going on between heaven and hell, or else Nergal will kill a bunch of babies that are in the maternity ward below. So of course, John's not going to let Nergal kill a bunch of babies, so he agrees to help Nergal. And in order to make it so John can actually do something, Nergal decides to heal John very quickly by giving him a blood transfusion of Nergal's own blood. And this works. John is instantly healed, even though it's very, very painful. And he ends up running and jumping out of the window of the hospital, but he doesn't get hurt because he's got demon blood and he was feeling very supercharged from it. And in the final page of the last issue, we saw John going to some kind of travel agency, and it looked like he was about to fly to America. So first things first, with issue 9, we got the cover. We see that John is looking like he's in pain. He's leaning against a wall, and behind him, people are looking and staring at him like they don't know what to do, but they're just watching him in pain. And we also see on the cover that this is written by Jamie Delano with art by John Ridgway and Alfredo Alcala. And as we turn to the first page, we see John is walking around smoking in an area of town that looks pretty bad. There's a bunch of buildings that are being knocked down by a wrecking ball, and he passes by a woman and a man who are next to a vehicle. I can't tell if the man is trying to push the woman in, like to kidnap her, or if he's trying to pull her out, but he's got a knife, so it looks pretty violent. And John is just like horrified by the scene, but he doesn't really do anything. But it turns out he doesn't need to, because the wrecking ball actually hits the wall of the building down that's next to them, and it ends up killing the guy, I believe. And then John just continues walking. He's not saying anything. There's just a lot of looking at this horrible part of town silently. He sees a homeless woman who's begging. He sees a prostitute who offers herself, and then when he doesn't say anything to her, she yells at him. But finally, as he's walking, he sees on the corner of where this stuff is getting demolished, there's a bar. So he goes into the bar to get a drink, and as he sits down at the bar top, we see a newspaper that's sitting there that says 1 in 61 babies HIV positive. And also we see on the top of this newspaper that we are in Gotham City, because the name on the newspaper, even though it's cut off, we can see it says Gotham on it. So John looks at the newspaper and then he crumples it, and the bartender says, "Pretty bad headline, eh?" And John replies, "I don't know. I was looking at the date." And before John crumpled the paper, we can see that the date on it was May 10th. And John continues, "It's my sodden birthday, isn't it? I'm 35 years old and totally shot to hell." And almost like he knows what John needs, the bartender hands John a large glass of beer without John having to order it. And as John grabs the glass, all of a sudden he hears a couple people behind him say, "Congratulations. Happy birthday, dear boy. Been celebrating then?" And as John turns around, he sees all the ghosts of his friends standing there. And this group of friends is growing pretty quickly, because not only do we have Richie from the first 2 issues, but Raymondi is there now, who was his gay friend that tried to help Zed out, but was beaten to death by the Resurrection Crusade. And when John sees them all, he must look like he's going to pass out, because the ghost of his friend Frank says, "Hey man, you better sit down before you fall." And Frank is pointing to the only open chair at the table that they're all sitting at. So John comes over to sit down, and as he does, the ghost of his old friend Emma says, "Jesus, you should look at yourself, John. You're disgusting, rotten drunk, stinking." And John looks at her and says, "So, what's it to you lot? You're all bloody dead." Ha! And then John starts singing the old pirate song, 15 Men on a Dead Man's Chest, and all the other patrons in the bar can't see the ghosts, So they just think John is being very loud and obnoxious. And one of the patrons yells out, "Quiet down, you Looney Tune, goddamn limey weirdo." Then the ghost of John's old friend Anne-Marie, who's a nun, says to him, "That's the problem, isn't it, John Constantine? You've tasted Satan's heady brew, and it's tempted you." And John yells back at her, "Tasted it? You bloody stupid nun. It's flowing in my veins. And you know what? I don't give a toss." And then we don't hear her response. We just see what the other patrons see, where John is yelling at empty chairs in front of him, and he says, "What's that? Listen, you stuttering prat. Don't give me that martyr crap. What do you think it's like for me? I'm haunted half to bloody death. Everyone wants my arse. The law, the elementals, heaven, hell. And if I stay ahead of all of them, what's the future got for me? A bed on the cancer ward, if there's a national health service left by then. I'm tired. Do you understand? The cards are bloody rubbish. I'm cashing in my chips. So bullocks to you." And just as John says that, the bartender gets sick of hearing this crazy man yell in his bar, so he pushes John outside, yelling, "All right, buddy, that's enough. Creep off and haunt some other joint." But as John stumbles out, we see that the ghost of Raimondi follows him and says, "John, wait. You're not alone. I know how you feel." And as John walks away from him, he says, "Oh, bloody do you?" And as the ghost of Ray catches up to him, he says, "When I found out I had AIDS, I felt totally alone, unclean, a pariah who could never again touch a thing of beauty without fear of corrupting it. For me, the most potent act of love could be the touch of death." And John rudely asks, "What's this got to do with me?" And Ray continues, "The demon blood has triggered a sort of psychic AIDS in you. Don't destroy yourself, John. Don't let self-pity poison you. At least you have love to hold on to." And to this, John says, "Balls. What love?" And Ray replies, "There's Zed, John. She loves you. And don't tell me you don't care for her. I know you do." And then just as Ray is saying that, the wall next to them, which is in the area that's being demolished, gets hit by the wrecking ball. And then the ghost of Ray is engulfed in the dust, and John yells out, "Shut up, you miserable old fruit. You know nothing. You're not even sodding real." And with that, the ghost of Raimondi is gone, and John lights a cigarette as he walks away from the pile of rubble that is left after the demolition. Then we cut to some time later where John is in his, motel room, and we get a famous scene from the movie that's acted out here, actually. So John is in the room at, what you would call the dining table, but it looks like a fold-out table, and he's smoking, and he's got a glass, and he puts it over a cockroach, and then he blows smoke under the glass, filling it with smoke, and torturing the cockroach. And this happens in the movie, but I think it's a spider in the movie that he's torturing. So as John does this to the cockroach, his narration says, "I should never have run here. This city is a rotten mouth. Its buildings broken teeth, loose and decaying gums. It's licked its chops and swallowed me. A rented room, fags in a bottle, a heap of clothes so dirty they could walk away. That's all that's left of me. Heating pipes gas like emphysemic lungs, but I'm cold. Cold as the frozen heart of God." So as John watches the cockroach squirm under the glass, his narration continues, "Choke, roach, wriggle, thrash, and die. No mercy, no hope, no rescue. No one could even find me here." And just as John thinks that, the pile of laundry that he mentioned begins to move. And then it begins to hover in the air, and John is freaked out by this, of course. So he doesn't even try to do anything like fight it or anything. He literally just runs out of the room and out of the motel, and the clothes actually chase and follow after him. And this is not in his head, because as John runs out of the front door, the clothes tumble out and end up lifeless on the sidewalk. So now John is walking in the same area as before where the demolition is going on, and as he does, his narration says, "Day after fugitive day, footstep after shuffling footstep, heartbeat after anxious heartbeat, my enemies hunt me down to the rocky bottom of this sunken city's ruined heart. I am an underwater man, hiding, squeezed into darkness, a kitten in a weighted sack, too tired to struggle. I nurse the bloated teat of drowned despair. I drift." And we see John go into one of these demoed buildings and just lean against the rubble and try to get some sleep, I guess. And as he's laying down, his narration says, but terror will not let me close my eyes. Wriggling, electric, real. It nuzzles me, liquid, sinuous as an eel, or oil. And there is a puddle of something black, like a black liquid, possibly oil, just forming next to John. And as John sits there, the oil begins to reach out and kind of stick to his jacket. So just like the clothes before, something else is now becoming animated and is trying to grab hold of John. And his narration says, elastic nightmare, adhesive night, fluid, spreading like disease. And then John yells at the black sticky liquid, no, please leave me alone. I can't help you. You're doomed. And then he pulls out a lighter and he flicks it and it lights the oil on fire. And he yells out, piss off and die on your own. And he actually lights himself on fire as well because there's some oil on his jacket, but he's able to put that out. And as we turn the page, we see he's once again just walking through this demolition area. And his narration continues. No rest. Last night, the woman in the room next to me sobbed till dawn. I could have killed her. Today, wounded sky leaks into a collapsing world. Soon there will be nowhere left to hide. I walk a swollen agony of feet. Pain keeps me moving. And fear. Once fear has got your scent, it's never far behind. And right as John thinks that, all of a sudden he passes by a newsstand and the papers blow out of it like the wind catches them. But then they form into a human-like construct with like arms and legs, and they begin to chase John. And John is still just walking. He doesn't realize the paper monster is following him, and his narration continues saying, forcing itself into the mundane. And then he must hear the rattling of the papers behind him because he turns, he sees the paper man walking towards him, and he takes off running yet again, and he runs into a bank. And right as he closes the glass entrance doors, the papers smack into it, and when it hits, the paper just falls apart, so there's no construct anymore, and it just kind of looks like John was running from a bunch of papers that were blowing in the wind. John holds the doors closed. His narration says, he's weak and desperate to trail me to this dead place. But of all the abandoned ghosts that haunt me, he's the one that scares me the most. And as John stands there looking out the window, all of a sudden the money in the bank begins to form into a construct again. So it seems whatever was forming the papers has now taken over the money. And of course, everybody's freaking out in the bank. They're all yelling. And when John sees what's happening, he just takes off again. And his narration says, panic ejects me into a frozen world that's quickly thawed by joyous greed. So the money, I guess, follows him outside because as he's running, this, money man is running after him. So everybody that he's passing by on the street sees just a pile of money running after John. And as they see this, they yell out, look at the money, man. Grab it. It's just blowing in the wind. So even though it was hot on John's tail, the money man is pulled apart by all of these people who just swarm him. And as John watches this, the narration says, they rip him, tear him to pieces, struggling like starving dogs over the crass bounty of a dying god. And even John thinks about reaching down and grabbing a couple loose bills, but his narration says, I'm tempted to fill my pockets too, but as I bend down with trembling outstretched hands, I know I daren't pick it up. So John leaves that scene and he goes into a building that's partially demolished, and there's just a couch sitting in a room that has a couple walls knocked down, but not all of them. And as John just sits staring forward, his narration says, been down so long, it looks like up to me. Again, the night is racked with endless sobbing, but this time it came from me. I shouldn't have to suffer this. This is not my duty. I don't owe anyone. Enough's enough. No more choices. It's over. So it seems like John has given up, and that is why he's sitting in a building that's about to be demolished completely, because we can hear the wrecking ball crunching walls around this area. So as John sits, his narration continues. Once I chose to be magic's consort. Then there was passion, good times. Now I'm all shagged out, grown old before my hour. But she, cruel immortal, whirls vibrant on her way, while I fall prey to welcome entropy. It's just like waiting at the dentist. And then John pulls out his cigarette pack, I guess to have one last smoke, and his narration says, last fag, end of the line. I hope it doesn't hurt. And as John sits there smoking, waiting to die, someone says to him, you bastard, you pathetic, whining bastard. And as John looks to see who's talking, he sees sitting next to him on the couch is a ghost version of his own self. But this is like a very dapper version of him, probably like the self-confident version of John. So the ghost John eyes John up and down and says, "Shift up. I'm knackered. Been looking for you all over. Struth, you smell like something the cat dragged in." And John turns away from this ghost version of him and says, "Go away. I've got nothing to say to you." And Ghost John replies, "Well, that's just tough, mate, because I've got plenty. You're just not on, son. Not on at all. In fact, you're a bleeding disgrace." And John says to him, "Please, just leave me alone. It's too late. Everything just got out of control. I bollocksed it up. The elementals, the crusaders, the damnation army. It's all an impossible mess. The world's on its way to hell, and I'll be there to meet it." And then Ghost John says, "Heroic bloody captain goes down with the ship, eh? You selfish, spineless git. What right have you got to just down tools and quit? Okay, so 20 years ago when you got in all this crazy stuff, it was strictly for the laughs and sex. But it's not a stable universe, kid. I thought you knew." And then John puts his head in his hands like either he's crying maybe, or maybe he's covering his ears because he doesn't want to hear it anymore. And the ghost of John says, "Christ, what an utter wanker. First sign of trouble and you're down on your knees licking the devil's arse." And this kind of angers John, and he says, "Piss off. Just piss off. There isn't any choice. And anyway, it's my life, and I'll do what I want." And the ghost replies, "That's where you're wrong, chum. It's my life, too. You've killed off everyone who ever cared for you. Now you want to kill me as well. No chance. You could crack this thing, you know, if you wanted to. Use your noodle, chum. Think about the prophecy. And the girl. I know you like to think about the girl." And as Ghost John says this, he just walks away and vanishes and leaves John just sitting there. And then John just stands up and he thinks, "Bastard." And then he walks out of the room. And just as he walks out, the wrecking ball comes through the wall and smashes the couch that John was sitting on. And it seems that little pep talk has worked, because as we turn the page, we see John is getting ready in front of a mirror and he's shaving. And his narration says, "Thinking's like archaeology. You scrape beneath your trowel, shape starts to form. Forgotten secrets come to light, till finally you reveal the face of perfect beauty. The plan. It's easy when you remember how." Then we cut from John shaving in the bathroom to a plane flying, and his narration continues. "A backstreet crap game provides the cash for clean clobber and a flight to Blighty. The old familiar rush is lifting me. I'm back on a winning streak." Then we see John exiting the airplane, and he's going through customs, and his narration says, "Immigration could be dodgy. I'm bound to be on the special branch list." And just as he thinks that, a uniformed hand reaches out and puts it on his shoulder and says, "Excuse me, sir." And John looks very alerted by this, but then when he turns to the officer, the man is holding a little pink box and is handing it to John saying, "I think you dropped this." And John just rolls with it and says, "Oh, wouldn't want to lose me duty freeze." And as John gets his luggage, he thinks, "Bleeding typical, isn't it? The only people who aren't after me are the bloody police. I need never have left the country." And that's kind of funny that John thought he was on the run from the authorities the whole time, but apparently that was all in his head and he didn't need to leave the country. So as John lights a cigarette, he thinks, right then, the plan. And as we turn the page, we cut to Glastonbury, where we can see Zed is outside of the, facility that she's being held at, and she's allowed to, walk the ground, so she's just staring out past the barbed wire. And the narration says, "Glastonbury, where the Crusaders hatch their plan. She likes to walk here, almost invisible in the fading light. They trust her now, not to run away. Not that she'd want to, even if she could get past the wire. Weeks spent back with the Crusade have convinced her that this is right. Hers is the life mapped by prophecy. But every now and then, memory slips a sudden uneasy hand inside her warm cloak of destiny, traversing her belly with a shocking touch." So as Zed looks out past the fence, she can see what looks like a man in the distance, and her narration continues. "Excitement, heartbeat. Is it him? No, just a scarecrow guarding winter wheat." So she moves from that area and begins walking into a grove of trees, and her narration continues. "Trees murmur secrets in the breeze. Poor John. She loved him, but it could never happen. Maybe if she told him more. But she was never the woman he knew as Zed. She was a crusader, and not just that, she was the chosen one, marked from birth to be the Mary. Just remember him fondly and hope that he fares well when the New Jerusalem conquers hell. And as Zed walks by a larger tree in the grove, we see a hand holding a cigarette come out from behind the tree next to her and say, "Hi, kid." And it turns out that this tree has like a cleft in it, so John was hiding in the kind of center of the tree where no one could see him. And when Zed turns as she hears his voice, she says, "What?" But John cuts her off saying, "Shh, quick, get in here. Don't want those bloody dogs turned loose." And then he pulls her into the tree and she says to him, "John." And he cuts her off again saying, "How do you like my tree? Cozy, isn't it?" And Zed continues asking, "John, what are you doing here? I thought..." And John cuts in, "What, that I was dead or crazy? Nah, not me, kid. I've come to break you out." But right as he says that, Zed closes her eyes and turns away from him and says, "No, John, I'm sorry, but I can't. I've decided I have to do it. It's what I was born for. Please don't try to make me." And then John does something here where he's trying to manipulate her because he says, "No, darling, I won't try to make you." So I play Fall Guy to a starring role in The Son of Man Part 2. And this little manipulation seems to work because Zed says, "Don't be bitter." And John replies, "I'm not. I'd probably do the same if I was you. What choice do you have? Queen of Heaven or Drudge of Hell?" And this right here is one of those scenes that I'm not sure if John is actually manipulating her or pretending, or if he's really sad, because a second ago it seemed like he was trying to manipulate her, but then he begins to cry. And Zed pulls him close into her chest and says, "Don't cry. I'll always love you, John." And John replies, "That's good. I'll always love you too." And then as she hugs him, they slowly kneel together, so now they're sitting on the ground. And they have a moment together, and then Zed says to him, "John?" And almost like John was reading her mind, he says, "I'd like to." So it seems like her just saying the word John was her asking if John wanted to make love. And as John looks into her eyes, she says, "Just once then?" And John says, "Yes." And as they hold each other, she says, "One last time, then you'll go and leave me with your memory." And John replies, "Yes." And then they kiss. And then in the heart of the tree on the ground, they make love. And the narration over these panels of their lovemaking says, "Like vines, our spirits intertwine, alive in every vibrant leaf, moving close in this private womb of wood. We meet, sad and exulant, tight-held, locked. These breathless moments, rare pearls that glisten in love's oyster." And then we cut to them being finished, and Zed is sleeping on the ground in the middle of the tree, and John is covering her with her cloak. And John's narration says, "I leave her sleeping. If she wakes up, I might just change my mind. Goodbye." And then John walks away from the tree, and he lights up a cigarette, and as he leaves, his narration says, "Sure sign I must be on the mend. I'm already back playing the old traitors game." And right here, this is like confirmation that yes, this was part of his plan. He was manipulating her, but also it did seem like he was sincere in some of those emotions. And as we turn the page, we see John is returning to his apartment in London, and he immediately pours himself a drink, and his narration says, "All the way back to London, I tell myself I've no regrets. By the time I get into the flat, I could almost believe it's true. Almost, but not quite." And then as John pours his drink, he says out loud, "She's going to want to kill me." And his narration continues, "The enormity of what I've done appalls me. If not for me, she could have been the mother of God. Christ, that demon's devious. He knew I'd never kill her. He healed me with his blood, just so that loving her I'd taint her, knowing that no angel would ever come where I'd spilled poison seed. So the Crusaders' Messiah is knocked back, and the damnation army holds all the aces. Not good. Unless the prophecy's fulfilled by some neutralizing force." And as he thinks neutralizing force, he begins to come up with a plan that involves his old buddy Swamp Thing. And as he mulls that around in his mind, he thinks, nah, he'd never wear it, would he? Maybe if I can seal the knowledge of the demon blood with a memory-blocking sigil. But just as he's thinking that, all of a sudden, the box of duty-free tobacco that he has begins to sprout and grow a body. And I guess because John was thinking about Swamp Thing, he knows this is actually Swamp Thing about to appear. So John waits as Swamp Thing begins to grow out of this box, and John says to him, "About bloody time you showed up, but did you have to use me duty-frees? They were the only smokes I'd got." And if you don't know, Swamp Thing and John have a very tenuous relationship. Swamp Thing hates John, and John loves antagonizing Swamp Thing. but sometimes Swamp Thing has to go to John for help and vice versa. So as Swamp Thing grows a mouth and a face and everything, he says, "Don't provoke me, Constantine. I'm tired of chasing you. No more tricks. This is urgent." And then John leaves the room for a second, and he starts digging through the drawer in his kitchen, and he pulls out some cigarette rolling paper. Because he wanted a smoke, damn it, and those were the only smokes that he had, and Swamp Thing now is growing his body out of tobacco. So just as Swamp Thing says that it's urgent and he needs John, John says, "Now, just hold still a minute." And then he pinches a bit of the tobacco off of Swamp Thing's body and says, "Ta," which means thank you. And then he rolls a cigarette and he begins smoking it. And Swamp Thing is very angered by this and he says, "You really are the lowest form of low. You joke even when the lives of an entire species are at stake." And then he grabs John by the lapels, and John is like kind of surprised by this, and the cigarette falls out of his mouth, and he says, "No, wait, hang about. Don't get cross. I've got it all under control." And then Swamp Thing lifts John up to his face, because Swamp Thing is much taller than John, and as he looks Swamp Thing in the eyes, John begs, saying, "Listen, give us a light and I'll tell you my plan. I think you're going to like it." And that, my friends, is the end of this issue. So just so you guys know, this is actually a crossover with Swamp Thing. So if you want to know everything that happens with John in this little crossover, I will link the Swamp Thing podcast down below, and it's for Swamp Thing number 76. But even if you decide not to listen to that, I will fill you guys in what happened during that Swamp Thing issue when I do the episode for Hellblazer number 10. And with that, if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, at gmail.com. And we will see you on the next one.